everybody, it's that time of year again. Now that it's 2025, let's go over the cult memoirs I read in 2024. Unlike in previous years, I won't be going over every book because I read 11 and I feel like that's a lot for a TikTok video. I will though go over my top 5 and why I recommend them. I do think it's also important to make note of, last year I had a serious hyperfixation on fundamentalist Mormonism and spent like a year and a half studying it by reading tons of books on it. So all of these books are going to be about the FLDS or other Mormon offshoots. In number 5, we have Escape by Carolyn Jessup. Carolyn Jessup was married off as a teenager to one of the leaders of the FLDS cult. His name was Merrill Jessup, and he already had numerous other wives, and said that he had married Carolyn as a kind of trophy wife because she was so much younger. He was pretty miserable for the time because of the inner politics of the family, as well as the favoritism, though she had many, many children with him. She ended up being one of, if not the first person to write a memoir about leaving the FLDS, as well as the first woman to leave with all of her children. At the time, this kind of a thing was unheard of, and I really commend her bravery and courage for coming out of the FLDS with all of her children and supporting them. Next up, we have His Favorite Wife by Sue and Ray Schmidt. This takes place in the Church of the Fullness of Times, which is another Mormon cult run in Mexico. This cult also emphasizes polygamy, as well as a special belief in a descendants of prophets through a specific family called the LeBarons. He is married off to the third most important brother, Verlin LeBaron. She marries him at the very young age of 15, and her husband frequently mentions how he's sad he can't take her with him on trips because she's underage, and if he gets caught, he'll go to jail. She is the favorite wife. This earns her a lot of jealousy from the other wives and doesn't necessarily even guarantee her great treatment from her husband. She's pretty miserable, and after what I believe is 2 children, she decides to be the first wife to leave him. Many more would follow her in the years to come. She ends up converting to mainstream Christianity, getting into a normal marriage, and having a nice life after she leaves. Besides having an interesting story to tell, Susan is able to talk about the inner politics of the cult because she was married to Verlin and he liked her so much. I also think because of her young age, it's able to showcase just how dark certain aspects of this cult were. Number 3 is Breaking Free by Rachel Jeffs. This is one of the many, many daughters of the notorious and evil cult leader Warren Jeffs. Many of you might already know who Warren Jeffs is, as he was on the run from the FBI. He ended up eventually being caught, though, and put in prison for conducting underage marriages with girls who were under the age of 13 at times. A memoir by his daughter, who ended up staying in the cult far longer than any of the other women I read about this year. Rachel Jeffs talks about her hard childhood, growing up with an abusive father. Though she eventually leaves him and gets married, her problems do not end there. Her father's abuse continues, though maybe not in the exact same way. Rather than physically abusing her, he now controls where she lives and if she's even allowed to see her own children, telling her that she's wicked and that she needs to get rebaptized and repent constantly without even necessarily telling her what she did wrong. Life is really hard with her own husband being turned against her during this time. It's a really insightful and detailed book, not only because it lets us into Warren Jeffs' household, but also because we're able to understand how Rachel gained strength to leave a powerful cult. It's never easy leaving something like that, especially when it's run by your own father. In a lot of the other books, it also really highlights, I feel like, the psychological things that are used to control people. Next up, we have in number 2, The Sound of Gravel by Ruth Warner. Ruth Warner was also part of the Church of the Fullness of Time as opposed to the FLDS. This book, while it is centered in a cult and does talk a lot about the cult, I feel like, unlike any of the other books that were mentioned here, is truly a story about Ruth Warner as a person. While she is the daughter of the supposed prophet of this group, she ends up living with her mother and her stepfather after her father is murdered over church politics. A stepfather who abuses her through SA. Perhaps even more painful, a mother who continues to excuse it or look past it because she can't imagine living a life without a man by her side. It is a very painful read, but I feel like also a very necessary one. Unlike some of the other books which focus on more of the big politics of the church, she really mostly focuses on her interpersonal life here. And I think that's just as important as books that highlight the more overlapping themes in these cults. Because cult psychology affects the day-to-day life. Having a cult where men are basically worshipped as gods and women are there to serve their every need, it's no surprise that these kinds of abuses arise. And when these cults are allowed to deal out justice in the way they see fit, is it any surprise that justice is not fulfilled properly? Eventually, she and her siblings are able to flee Mexico and go to a safe place. Interestingly enough, I also read another book called Daughters of Zion that talks about this to some extent from her aunt's perspective. Whether she does not cover every aspect of her personal story, her aunt does talk about some different aspects that I think really helped me to develop and understand what was going on. Finally, last but certainly not least, in first place we have The Witness Wore Red by Rebecca Musser. I in no way want to say that anybody's story is more important or less important in the list at all. That is not the point of this ranking. What I'm saying is that out of all these memoirs, this is the one that I connected to the best, and I felt like she, in her book, was personally able to reflect her journey of growth in a way that I understood the best. Rebecca Musser is married to Warren Jeffs' father, Rulon Jeffs, when again, she's a teenager and he is in his mid-80s. Kind of like in Rachel Jeffs' book, she's in a more privileged position as she's a wife of the prophet himself. Because of this, she's able to offer a real insight into what's going on in the cult that some of these other books weren't able to because they weren't up in that area. But she does not stop with her own personal journey. She really goes in depth to the crimes that occur after she leaves and how she personally helped in the investigation. You learn about behind-the-scenes stuff that happened in the supposed temple of the FLDS that you really aren't going to find in any other book, even Rachel's. It is a very painful read, though, as it does talk about the crimes of Warren Jeff, as well as the recordings she had to listen to in helping in the investigation, which do involve child essay. That is something to keep in mind if you're going to read this book, or honestly any of these books. They deal with young girls, often those who are not even of age yet, being married off to older men, and then being coerced into a sexual relationship that they often don't even understand. Despite how painful it can be to read these books, though, again, as I said earlier, I feel like it's important that we read these stories. How else are we going to know what goes on in these kinds of places and help people who are there if we don't know what's happening? When those who are in the worst possible situations find strength, we know that we can be there for others as well as find strength ourselves. While I did enjoy all of the occult books I read this year, these are the top 5 memoirs I personally recommend. As always, thank you for watching. Bye.